All right, so today we are going deep on something that I think a lot of people are fascinated by,
Mm-hmm.
but also maybe a little afraid of or maybe avoid thinking about,
Yeah.
and that's infidelity.
Yeah.
To help us unpack this,
Yeah.
we are using Esther Perel's book, The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity.
Great book.
And I think what's really interesting about this and why I wanted to do a deep dive on this is that it's not just about like what infidelity is,
Right.
but it's about what it tells us about ourselves as humans,
Mm-hmm.
about our relationships, and even about our culture, like the culture that we live in.
Definitely.
So before we even get started, I would just invite you, the listener,
Mm-hmm.
to think about what are your assumptions about affairs?
Okay.
Like, are they black and white, good or bad?
Yeah.
Because I think as we go along, you're going to see that things are much more nuanced.
It's so true. And I think what's captivating about Perel's work is she throws out like the blame game
Oh, yeah.
and really asks us to consider infidelity through a wider lens.
And she starts right off the bat by
Mm.
saying, affairs happen in every culture and in every historical period,
Ah,
even though it's taboo, right?
right.
That's crazy to think about.
It really is.
Like, if it's that ingrained in the human experience,
Mm-hmm.
can we really just blame it on, like, bad people or bad
Yeah.
relationships?
It really challenges those knee-jerk reactions we have, right?
Yeah.
And she makes this great point. If it was simply a sign of a broken relationship, wouldn't cultures with higher rates of affairs also have higher divorce rates?
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's not always the case.
Yeah, no, it's not.
So there's something else going on here.
Totally. And this is reminding me of that anecdote she gives about being with a group of Moroccan women
Yeah.
and suggesting divorce as a solution to infidelity.
Uh-huh.
And they kind of laughed.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, well, if we divorced, every man who cheated all of Morocco would be single.
Right. Exactly.
So it really depends on like the cultural context, right?
Absolutely. And it shapes not only like our experience of it, but also our response to it, which leads to another really interesting part. The language we use.
Yeah.
Like, think about the words we use. Cheater, betrayal, homewrecker.
Oh, yeah. Those are harsh.
They're like instant indictments,
They are.
emotionally charged, dripping with judgment.
It's true. Even just saying affair
Right.
feels heavy.
It does.
But then you think of words like lover or romance.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a different story.
Totally different.
It is. Yeah.
And what's interesting is that even therapists,
Okay.
who you would think would be kind of neutral,
Yeah.
often fall into the trap of using language that emphasizes like damage and blame
Right.
and miss the opportunity to explore the underlying emotional landscape.
Okay, so
Yeah.
are we saying ditch the judgment entirely?
Sure.
I mean, infidelity does cause pain.
Of
Right?
course it does.
So how do we balance understanding with acknowledging the hurt?
Well, it's not about condoning the
Right.
behavior,
Be-
but Perel makes this very important distinction.
Okay.
Understanding doesn't equal condoning. It's about recognizing that the pain is real, it's valid, and acknowledging that human motivations are complicated.
Okay, so it's more like
Mhm.
in the story of Benjamin, like she talks about Benjamin,
Yes, Benjamin, whose wife has Alzheimer's,
right? And she doesn't recognize him anymore.
doesn't recognize.
And he finds this comfort and connection with this other woman
Right.
whose husband is in the same nursing home.
Yes.
So is that cheating?
It really throws that traditional definition of infidelity into question, doesn't it? And that's Perel's point.
Okay.
Conventional ideas kind of break down when the very foundation of a relationship is fundamentally altered.
Wow.
You know, like in these cases of severe illness,
Here it is.
whose needs matter more,
Right.
what does fidelity even mean when the terms of the marital contract have changed so drastically?
You're making me realize that infidelity is not always so black and white like we make it out to be.
Right. And like you said, everybody involved
Yeah.
experiences it differently.
Totally.
From the betrayed partner to the unfaithful partner
Yeah.
to the other person involved to the children.
Right. Everyone is impacted.
Absolutely. And that's why Perel calls for what she calls a both-hand approach.
What's that?
It's about holding both realities at the same time,
Okay.
acknowledging the profound pain that it causes, while also recognizing that these situations can sometimes lead to growth or change.
Okay. So how do we make sense of this both hand idea?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like in practice?
It's about holding space for the complexity.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that people can be both deeply hurt by a partner's infidelity and still choose to work on the relationship.
Okay.
And understand that sometimes the reasons behind an affair are more nuanced.
Okay, so let's get into the reasons then.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's way more complicated than, like, the old stereotypes, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Men cheat for sex and women cheat for an emotional connection.
Yeah, those stereotypes are incredibly limiting. They fail to capture the multitude of reasons why people stray. And Perel challenges those simplistic explanations with stories.
Okay.
Like Delia and Russell.
Oh, yeah, the college sweethearts who reconnected years later.
Exactly.
Right.
Perel uses their story to illustrate how an affair can be rooted in a sense of longing and a belief that fate brought them back together.
Right, it's like destiny.
There's also Jude and Farah, a lesbian couple, navigating the challenges of infidelity, but in the context of an open relationship.
Yeah, so that adds a whole other layer.
A whole other layer.
Yeah.
And then there's Jackson, whose infidelity stemmed from feeling sexually rejected by his wife.
It's like infidelity can be a symptom of all sorts of things.
Right.
Both within the individual and the relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It can be an act of rebellion against societal expectations.
Oh, interesting.
A cry for help in a relationship that's grown stagnant.
Yep.
Or even, as counterintuitive as it sounds, an attempt to preserve a marriage.
Whoa, wait, what?
By injecting it with a dose of intensity.
Yeah. Okay, so you're telling me someone might have an affair to try to save their marriage.
It might seem paradoxical.
It does.
But an affair can be like this jolting wake-up call that forces couples to confront issues they've been avoiding.
Right, so it's like high risk, high reward kind of thing.
High risk, high stakes gamble.
Yeah.
Not one that Perel endorses.
Right.
But she acknowledges that for some, the affair becomes the catalyst for finally addressing those issues.
It's so interesting how we think about infidelity as like the ultimate betrayal.
Yeah.
But these days, there's almost as much pressure to divorce after infidelity
Good point.
as there is stigma around the affair itself.
Right. Perel calls this the new shame.
Okay.
And she argues that it's a really powerful social force.
That makes sense.
Think back to Hillary Clinton.
Oh, yeah.
And the intense judgment she faced for staying with Bill.
It's almost like we've swung from one extreme to the other.
Right.
Divorce was once like the worst thing you could do. Now it's like the expected response.
It's become the expected response.
Even when both partners may want to rebuild.
And this cultural shift, as Perel points out, can be so damaging.
How so?
Because it removes individual agency.
Okay.
That ability to make choices feel right for you and your relationship, regardless of societal pressures.
Like you're taking away someone's choice.
You're taking away their choice.
Wow.
And do you remember Jessica?
Yeah, the woman who wanted to work on her marriage after her husband's infidelity?
Yes.
Yeah.
She felt so much shame for not leaving him.
Like she was weak or something.
Right, like she was weak or settling.
Yeah.
And her experience highlights how this rush to divorce can create a culture where there's no room for repair.
Yeah.
For resilience, for acknowledging that humans mess up.
It's like we've lost sight of forgiveness.
We've lost sight of forgiveness, of second chances.
So what are we supposed to do then?
Yeah.
If judging and rushing to divorce aren't the answer,
right.
How should we be approaching this?
That's the central question that Perel grapples with.
Okay.
She acknowledges the immense pain it causes.
Right.
But she cautions against getting caught in a cycle of blame and vengeance.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
She advocates for a more nuanced approach.
Okay, what does that look like?
It starts with creating space for healing and growth.
Okay.
Regardless of whether the couple stays together or not.
Yeah.
And it requires a fundamental shift in perspective.
Like what?
One that moves beyond the simplistic narratives of good versus bad.
Okay.
Victim versus villain.
It's like that story Perel tells about the woman who tells her 5-year-old son all about his dad's infidelity.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Right. And it's like she's painting him as this horrible person.
That anecdote illustrates the destructive potential of perpetuating that culture of blame and vengeance.
Right, because you're inflicting more pain.
You're inflicting more pain, often on those who are already hurting the most.
Right. So back to this nuanced approach.
Yes.
Like, how do we actually cultivate that?
It starts with understanding.
But doesn't understanding kind of let the unfaithful partner off the hook?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
It's not about excusing the behavior, but rather about trying to understand the motivations behind it.
Okay.
Accountability is crucial.
Yeah.
But it can't exist without genuine self-reflection and a willingness to take responsibility.
So it's more about understanding the why.
Yes.
Than just focusing on the what.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that understanding, as difficult as it can be to reach
Yeah.
can become the foundation for meaningful change,
Okay.
for rebuilding trust, or even just making peace with the decision to move on.
I can see how that shift in perspective would be important, even if the couple decides to go their separate ways.
Absolutely. And this leads to another fascinating aspect of Perel's work.
Okay.
This idea that infidelity, while incredibly painful,
Yeah.
can also be a catalyst for positive change, both individually and within the relationship. She often quotes a therapist who says to couples in the aftermath of an affair, "Your first marriage is over. Would you like to create a second one together?"
Whoa.
Right. It challenges the assumption that an affair equals the end.
Yeah.
Instead, Perel invites us to consider the possibility
Okay.
that those raw, honest dialogues about desire, about boundaries, about needs and expectations
Yeah.
might actually be the key to building a stronger, more authentic relationship.
Oh, wow. So it's like this emotional earthquake
Yes.
that forces you to rebuild on more solid ground.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Of course, not all couples choose to rebuild after an affair,
Right.
and that's okay too.
Totally.
But even in those cases, the process of self-discovery and the insights gained can be so valuable for future relationships.
So it's not just about saving the current one,
Right.
but like learning and growing from the experience.
Regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, I like that.
Perel emphasizes that infidelity can be a catalyst for personal growth and a deeper understanding of ourselves and our needs.
Yeah.
It can be a painful process, but it can also be profoundly transformative.
You know, it's interesting how she talks about infidelity as like a window into the human heart.
Yes.
What do you think she means by that?
I think she's saying that infidelity forces us to confront some of our deepest fears and desires, both individually and as a society.
Okay.
It cracks open that facade of perfection we often present to the world.
Right, like we're not all perfect.
We're not all perfect.
Yeah.
And it exposes the messy, complicated truth of what it means to be human.
Right, to love, to hurt, to yearn for connection.
It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves and our relationships, revealing all the imperfections we try to keep hidden.
Which can be uncomfortable.
Incredibly uncomfortable.
But also enlightening.
And also incredibly illuminating.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes Perel's work so compelling.
Totally.
It's not about offering easy answers or passing judgment.
Right.
It's about inviting us into a deeper conversation about the human experience in all its messy glory.
Oh, I love that. Messy glory.
It is messy glory.
Yeah.
But it's a reminder that even in the midst of pain and heartbreak,
Yeah.
there's always potential for growth and transformation.
Always potential.
Yeah.
It is messy, but that messiness is kind of what makes us human, right?
It is, and Perel points out that it's in those messy, uncomfortable spaces that we often discover the most profound truths about ourselves and our relationships.
And it's interesting how she emphasizes that, like, most couples don't start having these conversations about their needs and desires until after something bad has already happened.
Exactly, until after an affair.
Like the crisis forces them to finally face the music.
It's like waiting for the house to catch fire before installing a smoke detector.
Oh, that's a good one.
Why do we wait for a crisis?
Yeah, why do we?
To force these crucial conversations.
What would it look like to have that honesty and vulnerability before things reach that breaking point?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that Perel really digs into.
Okay.
She advocates for what she calls relational hygiene.
Okay, what's that?
The idea that we need to be as proactive about tending to our relationships as we are about our physical well-being.
So it's like preventative care.
Exactly.
Instead of just like reacting.
It's about preventing the fires in the first place.
I like that.
Creating a space for open communication.
Yeah.
Checking in with each other's needs.
Regularly.
Being willing to adapt and grow as individuals and as a couple.
That takes a lot of courage, I think.
It does, but the rewards far outweigh the risks.
Okay.
When we create a culture of honesty and vulnerability in our relationships, we build that foundation of trust and intimacy that can weather any storm.
So for our listeners out there,
Yeah.
like what can they do to start having these conversations?
Even if they haven't experienced infidelity, start by asking yourself, what do you need in this relationship? What are you longing for?
Yeah.
What boundaries do you need to feel safe and respected?
All right.
And then be willing to share those needs with your partner in a way that's open and compassionate.
Not blaming.
Without blame, without judgment.
More of like an invitation.
Yes, an invitation.
Yeah.
Approach the conversation with curiosity and a desire to understand your partner's perspective. And remember, it's not a one-time fix.
Right, it's daunting.
Relationships are constantly evolving, so make it an ongoing dialogue.
Yeah, just check in with each other.
Check in, even when things are good.
Like preventative care.
Preventative care for your relationship.
I love that.
Yeah.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
What stood out to you as like the most surprising or insightful thing?
You know, for me, it was that idea that infidelity can be an opportunity for growth. It's not about condoning the behavior, but recognizing that in the midst of crisis, there's always potential for healing and transformation.
That's a great point.
And if infidelity is a window into the human heart, like Perel suggests, what does it reveal about our own desires, fears, and assumptions about love and relationships? What parts of ourselves do we try to keep hidden?
Oh, that's deep.
And what happens when those hidden parts come to light?
That's a really powerful question for everyone to think about.
It is.
As they continue on their journey of self-discovery in their relationships.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into infidelity.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.